Hello everyone, my name is Dax and welcome back to the Lovecraftian Video Game Retrospective and welcome to Magrunner Dark Pulse. Magrunner Dark Pulse is a 3D puzzle game and it's set in the near future. The world has been interconnected with the so-called LiveNet, which is essentially a super Facebook, and the founder of the corporation that owns this network, who's a parody of Mark Zuckerberg, wants to take humanity into the next age, and he chooses 7 different humans, among them the protagonist, Dax, and wants to explore space with them and find new energy sources and advance humanity. But first you have to go through a training facility, and this is where the game takes place. The game has one central mechanic, that is the so-called magnetism. You've got a glove and it allows you to charge certain objects such as cubes, platforms, elevators, stuff like that, with either a red or a green pulse. You can also change the color scheme in case you're colorblind. Very good quality of life feature. And if 2 objects have the same color, they attract one another. And if they have different colors, they repulse one another. This is not quite as magnetism works, but this is a video game, and for the purpose of this puzzle game here, it actually works quite well. And obviously you have to use this to solve all kinds of puzzles. You have to open locks, get over platforms, get to higher platforms, and you do all of this by manipulating these cubes. Unfortunately, you also do this by jumping, and you do this in the third dimension in a game where you can't see your feet, which is not a good idea. And while I kind of like the game's basic mechanic, which is simple but effective, unfortunately the jumping is not a whole lot of fun. I will admit I'm not a fan of first-person jumping, especially not in games where you can't see your feet, and this game here is no exception, and unfortunately the game requires you to do a lot of this. The game is also a console port, and it shows in a couple of levels. Firstly, the graphic settings are very basic, which isn't too much of a problem because the game generally runs quite well, so you're likely to have little problems running it on your machine, but it's also entirely checkpoint based, so you can't save in between. You can only save when the game gives you a checkpoint, and unfortunately it means that a lot of times you solve a puzzle, but then you have to do maybe one tricky jump, and if you fail you have to do everything all over again because you fall all the way down from whatever platform you're supposed to reach, and then it just gets frustrating. And another problem is that the game starts out with a couple of clever puzzles, but it doesn't really advance beyond that point. Instead the rooms just get larger, you have to do more jumping, there's more time between checkpoints, and overall it just gets slower and more tedious, but not really challenging in a good way, which is unfortunate. With regard to music and sound, the game does a job that's okay. The music feels very ambient-like. It's not distracting, but it's also not really outstanding. With regard to graphics, the game actually looks quite good. It's quite brightly colored, which is nice. So the developers didn't make the mistake of making everything just gray or making everything maybe just white, bright and futuristic. That was a good choice. And there's also a good amount of variety within the different levels. So at this point you're probably asking yourself what the hell this has to do with Lovecraft, but this game actually does have a strong Lovecraftian theme, because after a while things get a little darker. I'm not going to tell you too much because that would spoil the game's story, but needs to say things are not going to stay as bright and shiny as they are in the beginning. Unfortunately, the game's story is almost completely disconnected from the puzzles. It almost feels like there's 2 games. One game which has all the puzzles and the magnetism story, and one game which has the social network and the story about the other dark stuff. And unfortunately you have to solve a lot of puzzles in between very short story segments, so for the most part it almost feels like there's no story at all, and to be honest, maybe they could have dropped the story, or maybe they could have made the entire game a little bit tighter. So that's one of the game's problems. So the puzzles didn't really keep me going because, as said before, they were kind of tedious, and I had the feeling that the story I got out of it wasn't really all that rewarding. Another problem is here that the game takes itself way too seriously. For example, the Mark Zuckerberg parody, it's clearly one because the character's name is actually an anagram of Mark Zuckerberg's name. He's not really played as a parody. I called him a parody character, but he's actually played pretty straight, and that's a feeling the developers thought, or the writer thought, the character was kind of clever, but he really comes across as very generic, and the commentary on social network and modern media that the game does feels very, very ham-fisted and extremely forced. And it's not even ridiculous enough to be funny, but it's also not done well enough for me to be taken serious. So it feels like a very forced message and essentially like a bad PSA, which is not a good thing. So ultimately, if you like puzzle games like this, then you might give this game a shot, but be advised that the game's story is probably not going to make up for the game's shortcomings, even if you like Lovecraftian stories. And unfortunately, you really have to like first-person platforming in a 3D space, otherwise this game is not going to be for you. Thanks for watching, and I shall see you next time. Take care and goodbye.